The first thing Zoe registers is the cold, not the air, though the jet bridge breathes a dull refrigerated draft over her forearms, but the nickel bite of the cuffs, where the edges press into the soft skin above each wrist bone. Whenever the officers adjust their grip, a new ridge discovers a new strip of flesh. She keeps her shoulders square and her gaze steady because eyes are everywhere. The low, mechanical sneeze of phone shutters moves like invisible insects. She will not bend to them. She will not give them the easy image of a bowed head. They route her through a service door at the end of the bridge and into a corridor of white tile and hard light. A sign says the airport name in cheerful blue, which feels indecent. The officer on her left smells faintly of mint. The one on her right brings a breath of machine oil and tired wool. Their radios crackle with half-formed code and clipped surnames. Ahead of them, a supervisor in a charcoal jacket walks quickly, without appearing to hurry. He does not look back. Heather follows a step behind, hugging the laptop like a case file. The screen lid is glossy enough to throw a ghost of everything around it. For a second, Zoe sees a flattened copy of her own mouth reflected there, the line ironed thin by control. Heather's heels keep an even patient tick on the tile, a metronome that refuses to acknowledge anyone else's rhythm. "Move along," the mint breath officer says, a voice as neutral as a gate announcement. Zoe moves. Each step makes the cuff chain tap. Each tap sends a bead of heat through skin. Something warm is gathering under the bracelet on her right hand. Choosing a path across her palm, she curls her fingers. Warmth pools at the crease of her thumb. Under the hard fluorescence, the floor is polished into a mirror. Her body appears twice, once upright, once upside down beneath her shoes like a second shadow. "Careful on the slope," the other officer says as the corridor lips downward. The gate area opens to the left for a heartbeat, a slice of carpet and murmuring lives. People freeze at the edge of the slice, as if sketching a circle around the moment. A man in a soft gray hoodie, a woman in a denim jacket with a paperback still open in one hand, a boy chewing the string of his backpack. All of them lift their phones with the reflex of umbrellas at first rain. The boy's eyes flick from the cuffs to Zoe's face and back again. His mouth pinches as if he is trying to remember a rule about fairness he once heard at a kitchen table. Zoe fixes on the seams between the tiles and counts them to keep her breath level, exhaling in sets that she can control. She can do 10 seams to a breath, 11 if she must. Counting is a small private fence. She does not give them a misstep to discuss later. She lets her body move like a line drawn with a ruler. Heather's gaze drops to the thin wet line forming along Zoe's wrist, then lifts back to neutral. Camera off. Heather murmurs to someone behind her, already swallowed by a burst of radio static, as if the air refused to carry the request. The corridor widens into a square with a frosted door marked security in blunt black letters. The supervisor raps twice on the handle in a way that suggests a habit more than a thought. The door opens on a room that smells like disinfectant and old coffee. A desk sits behind plexiglass. A scale leans against a wall, and a chair made of welded edges waits under too much light. A wall clock ticks with exaggerated importance. "Sit," the supervisor says, and to the officers, "Hold position." He points at the chair. It is bolted to the floor. Zoe lowers herself and arranges her coat so it will not be trapped. The cuffs grind. She does not flinch. "The cuffs are too tight," she says. The sentence is neither plea nor threat. It is a measured entry on an invisible form. "Noted," says the mint breath officer, but he does not move. Blood makes a slow, bright decision and falls. One drop finds the chair, another, the tile. The sound is soft as first rain, but in this room it lands with meaning. The woman behind the plexiglass winces, disappears through a door, and returns with a small box of gauze, placed on the counter, as if it might be contraband. "We do intake first," the supervisor says, keeping his voice level. But the clean walls fling the words back a shade sharper. Zoe's breath taps a steady pattern in her chest. She thinks, with an almost comic clarity, of the little silver wing she pinned to her collar that morning, a piece that used to catch at her mother's hair. The memory arrives complete with the dry starch smell of her shirt, the neat click of the clasp, the faint almond lotion her father leaves, uncapped. The mind is not a gate. It is a long house with too many doors. A phone buzzes behind the plexiglass. The woman answers, her voice climbing and flattening as it repeats someone else's urgency. The words unscheduled, stop and calm and minor bleeding thread the air. She adds, "The father called," then lowers her voice and says, "She made no promises, and yes, sir, and I understand." Heather sets the laptop on the counter with deliberate care and leans in. "Let us be efficient," she says softly. "For everyone's sake." Zoe meets her eyes. The laptop keeps trying to mirror the room and never quite succeeds. In its imperfect gloss, Zoe sees herself as though she were someone else's description, a girl with wrists bound and hair pulled into a practical knot. She trades breaths with her reflection, slow for slow. Heather's eyes are bright and exact, too blue for the light they are in. "Name?" the plexiglass woman says, eyes moving across a form. "Zoe Williams." Zoe answers, and the consonants hold solid. "Birth date?" the woman asks, and Zoe answers. "Address?" And Zoe answers again. "Any injuries besides the wrists?" The woman asks with an apologetic glance. "No," Zoe says, turning her hands to show the metal teeth, a lesson in cause and effect. "We can loosen one notch," the supervisor says, clearing his throat like a man agreeing with a principle. The key rattles in the small keyhole. The metal ratchets back a tooth. It is not freedom. It is a partial undoing that stings worse for the space it creates. "Thank you," Zoe says, "because politeness is a tool like any other, and today it serves." Outside the door, someone calls, "She is just a kid," and the phrase thins as it bounces along tile. Another voice, firmer, instructs a step back. Something plastic hits the floor and skitters. A breathy exclamation follows it like a tail. Zoe's mouth go dry. She presses her tongue to the back of her teeth and counts them. Another private ledger. She keeps her rooms separate, the one warm with almond and morning light and a silver pin, and this one humming with fluorescent insistence, and the clock that wants to be a judge. "Phone call," she says. "I would like to make a phone call." The sentence belongs to her. She carries it like identification. The supervisor glances at Heather. Heather arranges her mouth into official neutrality. "One call," the supervisor says. "One, and it will be recorded." "I understand," Zoe says. The woman behind the plexiglass slides a telephone through a slot. The coiled cord has the sagging patience of something that remembers too many hands. The handset is heavier than it appears. Old black plastic, pitted by time. When Zoe lifts it, her cuff chain gives a small, definite clink, and the room seems to acknowledge the sound by falling still for half a heartbeat. "What number?" the woman asks. Zoe recites it, each digit a word. The woman dials on a chirping keypad. The ringtone arrives small and exact, a measured voice that knows how to wait. One ring, two, three. On the fourth, a line opens and the air moves between places. "This is Williams." A steady voice says, lower than the room deserves. Zoe straightens without meaning to. The chain stretches and complains. She is aware of Heather's attention and the supervisor's posture, and the way the mint breath officer turns his head just enough to listen without appearing to. She is aware of the clock's hand, stepping its small march. "Dad," she says. It is meridian. There is no pause, only a shift, like a shelf, emptied of unnecessary weight. "Tell me where you are," he says. "Security office." She answers. "I am all right." She adds, half true and fully useful. "Put the person in charge on the phone," he says. Zoe holds out the handset and the supervisor takes it, fingers clean and nails square. "This is officer," he begins. "You have my daughter in restraints." The voice on the line says, polite and unstoppable, "I want your badge number, your commanding officer's name, and the precise time and reason for her detention. Provide those details now." The supervisor looks at the clock. "Badge 4230, he says, and Supervisor Jenkins, and a time and the reported reason in careful language. "Record those, please," the voice says. "You are recording." "I am recording." "Keep your tone professional." Jenkins becomes somehow straighter because a sentence asked him to be. Professional moves through the room like an air filter, making the air easier to breathe. Heather shifts, the laptop edge kissing the plexiglass with a soft sound. Her eyes never leave Zoe. They are not cruel, only busy, and busy eyes push through people like gates. The cuffs bite and rest. As Zoe flexes and releases, the pain is small and honest, and reminds her of the shape she occupies. "You will permit medical attention for any injury caused by the restraints," the voice says. "You will preserve all body camera footage, radio transmissions, and incident reports. You will not delete or overwrite anything. Do you understand?" "Yes," Jenkins says, and the yes carries a click of relief. Some men like rules because rules hold. "Return the phone to my daughter," the voice says. Jenkins passes it back. The plastic is warmer. Zoe settles it against her ear as if she has trained for this, because in a way she has. "I am here," she says. "Are you hurt?" he asks. "Minor," she says, choosing a safe square of the truth. "We will handle the rest," he says. "Stay calm. You did nothing wrong." Zoe exhales and allows her lungs to ignore the clock. "Repeat that," he says. "I did nothing wrong." Again, "I did nothing wrong." A breath travels the line and takes its time. When he speaks again, the edges are soft, which means the center has gone hard. "You will answer what you must, and ask for everything in writing," he says. "Do not sign anything without me or counsel on the line. If they deny a reasonable request, repeat the request, and note the time." "Understood, understood," she says. "And Zoe," he adds. "Yes, breathe." She does. The inhale finds her ribs and lights them from within. She releases it slowly and lets the room choose that pace. "Tell them your wrists need attention now," he says. "Tell them politely that I am on my way." He does not say how. He does not need to. She could map his route in 3 neat lines on a napkin. "Okay," she says. The call ends with a precise electronic click that suddenly feels large. The dial tone returns like a room after a guest leaves. Zoe sets the handset down gently. The coil swings once and stills. "Medical," Jenkins says to the plexiglass. "And get the body camera log." "Already pulling," the woman answers, opening a drawer for a sealed kit and breaking the seal with a crisp sound that echoes. Heather lifts the laptop lid an inch. The screen light is its own weather, cooler than the room. "For efficiency, officer," she says, not unkindly, "I can provide crew statements." After medical, Jenkins says, "And we will record our own." Heather's mouth holds the neutral line. Her fingers rest on the lid like a pianist, poised above a first bar. A medic in a navy polo arrives with a kit, and the clean scent of laundry and lemon. "Let us see," she says. "We will loosen, clean, and bandage." The key turns, the cuff clicks back another notch. The instant of space burns worse than the pinch. The medic works with competent hands. Saline, gauze, alcohol. The white bandage lies clean against Zoe's skin. "Any dizziness?" The medic asks. "No," Zoe says. "You will bruise. Keep them elevated when you can." Zoe pictures the silver wing pin and lifts her hands an inch. It changes the room. The clock shifts from a ceiling to a simple object on a wall. Through the frosted door, shapes slide past, like fish beyond glass. Officers. A couple arguing about a stroller wheel. A cart of wrapped sandwiches. Life presses its face to the glass and fogs it, and moves on. Someone outside whispers that this will be on the news, and another voice says that it already is. Zoe looks at the two red dots. The gauze lifted from chair and tile, small, precise marks, as if they belong to a measurement she has not learned. The medic seals the stained pad in a clear bag, printed with fields she cannot read from here. Procedure folds around even this. Jenkins writes in his ledger and tears a sheet free with care, sliding it under the plexiglass to be stamped. The taps of his finger on the counter sound like a rhythm he trusts. "Can we expedite?" Heather asks, still polite. "We will be thorough," Jenkins says, and he wears the word like an emblem. Zoe's pulse steadies to a working beat. She closes her eyes for one breath of unlit quiet, the kind of quiet you make by throwing a cloth over a cage to tell a bird it is night. She opens them again, and everything is unchanged and slightly more manageable. "Water," the medic offers. "Yes," Zoe says, taking the paper cup and refusing to crush it. She can feel the cameras beyond the door like heat from a radiator. She does not look at them. She looks ahead. She is in the center of an act, and the act is to remain herself while other people narrate. Her wrapped wrists rest on her thighs. The white edges lie neat and honest. The cuffs sit on the desk now. Not hands and not threats, merely objects with a purpose. "All right," Jenkins says, looking up. "We are going to do this correctly." Zoe does not nod. She holds his eyes for a second, and then looks forward again, toward the door and the unspooling air. She has done nothing wrong. She repeats it once in silence, and this time it feels less like a shield and more like a shape that fits her exactly. Morning returns to her in the way a tide returns to a familiar shore, deliberate and inevitable. In the security room, the clock's hard tick fades into the soft domestic clicks that began the day, and Zoe lets herself remember without floating away from the chair or the bandages. She remembers starch and steam and the minute weight of the silver wing pin warming in her palm before she fastened it through her collar. The wing had belonged to her mother. It always caught light even when the room offered very little. She remembers her father leaning on the doorframe the way he does when he means to give time and still move it along. The gentle almond scent he trails because he forgets to cap the lotion. The patient seriousness in his voice. "Respect may be earned," he said. "Dignity is carried. No one can grant it, and no one can take it." She nodded then and says nothing now. She lays the memory down like a straight edge across the messy surface of the afternoon and breathes along its edge. The airport morning had presented itself with its usual layered smells. Coffee over cleaning solution over the faint metallic thrum of belts and tracks and escalators. Announcements braided themselves into white ceilings and slipped along the column. At check-in, the agent's smile had been the precise professional wattage meant for everyone and no one. The scanner beeped with that bland cheer used by machines trained to accept a little friction from strangers. Another agent glanced and then looked away, and then back. A small triple stitch over nothing at all. Zoe watched the little dramas of security, like a person who loves orchestras, watches tuning. A man repacked his bag in nested rectangles until the zipper closed as if grateful. A woman scolded a partner and softened the scold with a touch on the elbow when she believed it had traveled too far. A child surrendered shoes with the gravity of a monarch abdicating and then demanded a bin of her own. She counted, not because she needed to, but because counting translates to any room, turns of the rope line, the steps between bins, the heartbeats under the scanner arch that blinked and let her pass. Her bag emerged. Her sneakers found her feet, the loop of belt settled into its familiar notch. She kept her breathing measured and easy. Gate C-27 appeared on the monitor, like a pair who had been married long enough to match each other's pace. The word "on time" sat there without urgency. The waiting area performed its practiced choreography of arrivals and departures, roller bags angling and apologizing, faces angling and pretending not to ask about each other's destinations. She found a seat within sight of the boarding door and the small mouth of the scanner. She drank water from a paper cup and turned her boarding pass in her fingers. There it was, a small red mark at the corner, ink sunk in beneath the glossy top layer. She had not seen it on the digital pass she had saved. She had not seen it on any pass before. Red is never neutral inside a system. One of the gate agents glanced as if summoned and smoothed her blouse, as if remembering the line of her own body in the world. The other agent pretended not to see, and then saw again. Zoe rubbed her thumb across the corner and felt the grit of ink inside the paper grain. She did not ask, she looked instead, because looking is how you begin a record. Around her, a young man leaned to a friend and said the morning light made planes look like toys. The friend said toys were safer. Nobody expects them to be real. A woman farther down the row apologized into a phone for a meeting that could not move. Somewhere a backpack chimed and made no apology for its cheer. Pre-boarding began. The to and fro of elite layers did its familiar quiet comb through the crowd. Zoe waited, not late and not eager. She rose, smoothed her shirt, and touched the pin at her throat, without making a moment of it. When the line thinned, she stepped into it, and let the space between her and the person ahead be a measured arm's length. She held the pass the way people hold photographs when they mean to keep them clean. The scanner sang the same bright note it had sung for others, but the agent's eyes did not keep the rhythm. A pause, the small kind that tells you the line is smooth only because something has been sanded. Seat 2A, the agent said. The words did not quite settle. Her fingers held the pass a fraction longer than courtesy. Another agent appeared as if grown from the carpet, and they shared a glance that might as well have been a whisper hidden inside a file. "Thank you," Zoe said. That was all. She took the pass when it was offered, and followed the carpet into the cabin. The air inside measured itself to an exact coolness, an obedient number she could almost guess, by how the hair on her forearms agreed to stand in orderly rows. He was there already. The man who would later have a name sat where her window and her breath should be. His suit suggested it wished to be ignored as a luxury, and could not quite manage it. His knees occupied more than their share of the world. One hand rested where her laptop would belong. When he looked up, it was with a householder's mild surprise, the kind offered when someone finds a stranger in the kitchen and chooses to be gracious about it. "I believe you are in my seat," Zoe said. He glanced at his boarding pass with the unexamined confidence of a person for whom paper behaves. 2A. he said, as if ending a thought he had not invited her to join. Zoe held her pass where he could see it. He did not look at it. He looked at her instead, amusement at the corner of his mouth, as though chance had staged a small lesson for someone else, and he would not mind being patient while they learned it. His bag, heavy and apologetic about nothing, occupied space like a guest who believed invitation implied ownership. A flight attendant appeared the way an answer appears when a room expects it, blonde hair precise, uniform pressed into correctness. Her name badge read Heather. Her smile had the firmness of a rule that will not raise its voice. "Is there an issue?" she said, already leaning toward the man, as if gravity had been briefed. Zoe displayed her pass. Heather looked at it, and then at the little red mark, and then at Zoe, and then at the curtain that split the plane into versions of the world. "Take a seat in economy," Heather said, tone carefully even. Her eyes turned the instruction into something simple, a matter of tidiness. Zoe felt anger arrive, exactly where it always does, like a familiar knock. Behind it came the steadier hand that knows how to reach for the right tool. She looked at the red mark, at the man who adjusted his cuff with an apology that did not reach his face, at Heather's serene mouth. Then she looked down the aisle where air cost less and manners cost more. She stepped back. The curtain sighed on its small track with the gentle satisfaction of a door being polite. A middle row allowed her just enough room to fold herself and her laptop and her plans into a shape that would not intrude. The economy cabin pressed into its peculiar geometry, strangers fitted to strangers by armrests and courtesy. A girl across the aisle watched a show without sound and invented dialogue with her eyebrows. A phone behind them chirped like a toy from a kinder year. Zoe opened the laptop a measured angle, just enough to wake the glow and watch the battery steady itself. Her calendar block expanded like a window sliding open. Her notes waited in paragraphs she had tuned for clarity. Phrases were highlighted for her eye, and no one else's. A tab with the paper she meant to reread blinked with patient invitation. The chime overhead reminded everyone that belts were not suggestions. The cabin harmonized itself around a hum. "He does not know her father owns this airline." The sentence did not belong to anyone's mouth. It settled over the scene like an embossed seal that only the audience could feel. It was not a boast. It was a simple fact, with no need to argue. Zoe kept her eyes forward. She touched the pin and let its tiny warmth become a breathing rhythm. The safety demonstration unfolded with its ritual dignity. People pretended not to watch while not watching. The man beside her mouthed along and grinned at himself for it. The woman on the aisle closed her eyes and placed a hand over a stomach that might have been carrying someone else. The plane took the runway, and the world outside wavered like heat, though the air was cool. The wheels let go. Sound changed its coat, and everyone knew it. Turbulence was announced before it was felt, and then felt in a courteous series of nods. The light blinked its small law back on. Somewhere behind them, a quiet curse apologized to no one. Zoe braced her laptop with the heel of her hand and tried to absorb herself into the neat architecture of her notes. She adjusted an overactive verb to one that stood straighter without raising its voice. She flagged a citation to be delivered later with clinical precision, and zero heat. The laptop edged, thought better of it, and edged again when the plane spoke more sharply to the air. The tray table became a stage too small for the scene. The red corner of the boarding pass glowed in the edge of her vision, a mouth with a secret. She slid the pass under the tray to pin it. The plane shrugged, a larger jolt this time, and somewhere metal scolded its own design. The laptop slipped, balanced a breath on the tray lip, as if auditioning the future, then chose the aisle. She heard the soft thud before she saw it. A hand reached down and lifted it before she could unbuckle. The hand belonged to Heather. The face above the hand was composed, not irritated, almost satisfied to be holding what could be held up. The logo on the lid faced Zoe like a badge. "You sure?" Heather said, her gaze studying the screen area, though the lid stayed mostly closed. The question carried the faint shape of a statement about value. "That is mine," Zoe said. The words were steady, not sharp. She held the tray with both hands to keep from reaching. "I am recording this," a voice said from the next row. Calm and clear. A woman with her hair pulled back held her phone low and steady, the way someone cradles a sleeping thing. She did not add any flourish to the sentence. Her eyes moved between Zoe and Heather and the laptop, and the red mark peeking from beneath the tray. The camera saw what it saw. Witness is also a tool. The breath sat high in Zoe's chest, like something that wanted a better view. She lowered it with care. She pictured the document open on the laptop, the highlighted lines that meant preparation, the calendar square that meant future. The recording phone framed the moment without intruding. The woman's wrists did not shake. "The captain will need to be informed," Heather said. Her voice had dried a fraction. She pivoted, still holding the laptop like an object that had not yet earned the right to be returned. She stepped toward the galley. The curtains swished, a sound that wrote itself into memory with unhelpful clarity. The belt sign did not relent. The hum kept its false calm. Zoe pressed 2 fingers against the pin and found it warm enough to count. She did not pray. She arranged, count the breath, count the count, place the count where it steadies the mind. She looked at the red mark under the tray where the edge of the ink stared back, as if it understood that systems can be clean and still be something else underneath. The woman with the phone kept recording, and in that quiet defiance, Zoe felt the world tilt a fraction nearer to balance. Ordinary injustice had misjudged its audience. Evidence had been born, small and unshaking. Somewhere ahead of a curtain, a voice would choose the wrong word. Somewhere beyond that, a room with bright lights would ask its clock to behave. For now, the cabin breathed in a single working animal rhythm, and the plane rode a line through air toward a point that might yet be changed. Zoe kept her hands where they belonged, and her voice where she could reach it. The sentence waited in her mouth, like a key. "That is mine." The cabin hum tightens into a wire, and Zoe feels the air press closer to skin, as if the weather inside the plane has chosen a direction and is gathering itself to follow through. Heather has taken the laptop toward the galley, and the curtain has closed with that soft, practiced whisper that divides one set of rules from another. Across the aisle, the woman with the neat ponytail keeps her phone lifted at a calm, deliberate angle, a rectangle held level. Like a quiet oath, she says nothing more. The lens looks without blinking, steady as a pulse that has decided not to rush. Zoe settles her hands flat on either side of the tray table, showing the plane the openness of her palms. The corner of the boarding pass peeks from under the plastic lip, the small red mark visible like a secret that refuses to be entirely hidden. She feels her pulse in the soft skin at her inner wrists, where a watch used to leave a faint circle on long days. She does not count beats there. She chooses a steadier instrument. Breath in for 4, hold 1, out for 6. Again, the rhythm lays a rail through the middle of her, and the wheels of her lungs follow it without complaint. The seatbelt chime speaks, and some panel overhead answers with a quick shake of metal. Air tips and rights itself. A child releases a yelp and laughs at her own startle. A bin lid mutters and then remembers to stay shut. Zoe keeps her gaze forward. Turning toward the galley will not bring the laptop back. It will only squander the small, clean coins of focus she has saved for what matters. She watches the aisle as if it were a thin, straight street, lined with neighborhoods of knees and elbows and opinions. Heather appears again, the laptop balanced on both hands as if it might tip toward whatever story she chooses to tell. She does not meet Zoe's eyes. She props the device on the metal lip by the jump seat and lifts the interphone with the smooth practicality of someone who lives by procedure. Zoe cannot hear the words, only the cadence of an official sentence delivered by a mouth that expects to be received as reasonable. The recorder across the aisle tilts her phone to hold both Heather and the black gleam of the laptop in the same silent frame. Faces in nearby rows perform the ritual of pretending not to listen while every ear reshapes itself to catch more. The plane lifts and drops, not sharply, more like a shoulder shrugging. Heather ends the call and stays in the galley alcove, squared to an authority behind the curtain. The attendant in the jump seat checks her harness with two neat tugs, as if attention can raise the quality of a safety already there. Zoe becomes aware of a small dampness where the silver wing pin rests against her shirt. She lets the morning memory return with the precision of a good photograph. It arrives without sentiment, a clean image placed upright on a mental shelf where it will not fall. The captain's voice arrives through the speakers with a smoothness that wants to be a blanket. "Ladies and gentlemen" rolls into the air, a phrase that feels like a costume borrowed for the afternoon. "We are expecting a little rough air on our route today," he says, and the plane obliges with a courteous rock, as if to underline the sentence. "Please make sure you are seated with your seatbelt fastened." The voice leaves. The hum resettles. A large animal told to lie down. The aisle seat passenger in Zoe's row exhales and presses a palm to her middle, coaching some inner creature to ride quietly. The window passenger leans his head to the pane in a posture that believes in invulnerability and will later pay for it with a stiff neck. The recorder keeps filming, shoulders loose, thumb steady. On the glass of the phone, a tiny reflection slides, and Zoe sees the suggestion of digits in a corner. An on-screen time that means nothing, until a room with bright lights asks it to mean everything. It is not her work to memorize it now. Later, someone will read those numbers out loud. Heather lifts the handset again. Her mouth moves in clean, competent lines. She nods once, the nod of a person delivering a report that has already made up its mind. She returns the handset to its cradle with a click that sounds like a box being shut. Then she picks up the laptop again. Her fingers do not touch the keys. She holds it like a tool that could cut someone if misused. Zoe lets longing rise to her hands and then calls it back, as if reminding the body that it does not get to vote on strategy. In her head, she recites the first question she expects to face, then the second, then her preferred variation of the third, the one that lets a data point sit long enough to be understood without drama. The machine would have held those sentences in a window for her. She refuses to mistake the absence of a window for the absence of thought. An empty hand can still point. The plane gives a longer heave. Cups whisper against plastic. Somewhere toward the rear, a voice laughs a little too loud. The costume fear wears when it wants to look like ease. Heather steps into the aisle as if bracing against a door that might swing, and she measures the length of the cabin the way a runner measures a hallway before deciding to sprint. The recorder angles the phone with the same patient steadiness, framing Heather and the laptop and the curtain stripe and Zoe's still shoulders. For a beat, the geometry feels like a diagram that could be drawn later with lines and circles and neat arrows. A voice bleeds through the curtain from the forward galley. Zoe cannot see the speaker, only the way Heather's chin lifts in answer. Heather turns to the interphone for a third call. When she speaks, Zoe hears the register of a report promoted to a verdict. She catches security and concern and crew, and the phrase, "We have reason," heads lift in rows as if a wire has tugged them together. The recorder holds steadily on. The captain returns to the speakers, and his tone has lost a little of its blanket. It has become a sheet that does not quite cover the corners of the bed. "For your safety," he says, "we will be making an unscheduled stop in Raleigh-Durham." There is a pause, so exact it might have been timed with a metronome. "We appreciate your cooperation. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The cabin inhales as one, a choir finding the same note. A toddler begins a commentary, and a parent hushes in a language Zoe does not know, a rhythm with the same tempo as heartbeat. The window passenger opens his eyes, annoyed that the ground has made a claim on his time. The aisle passenger sets her gaze on Zoe's hands, and then lifts it away with honest curiosity and no accusation. The recorder keeps recording. The small bright clock on her screen insists on accuracy. Zoe draws breath the way she learned when she was young and scared to speak in class. Let it drop low. Let it take its place. The pin at her collar feels heavier now, as if dignity could add weight the way metal does. She hears her father's voice, not as a voiceover, not as magic, but as a remembered instruction that has proven itself. Find the line and stand on it. Not behind, not over. On. She finds the narrow place where compliance and self-respect meet and fit the palm of one hand against the palm of the other. The descent begins by creeps and steps. Zoe feels it first in the small tug on organs that makes the body aware of the planet again. Sound sharpens. People grow louder when planes go down, as if some old part of the brain believes it needs to talk to the ground before it arrives. The attendants move with a clipped efficiency that has no room left for charm, testing latches, checking belts, nodding the nods that make a cabin behave. Heather goes to the first-class curtain and pulls it aside to speak with someone who stays off stage. She glances back to economy across and down, and her gaze lands on Zoe like a cursor finds a word. It sits there for a beat, not pity, not anger, but the officious certainty of a person who thinks she is serving a principle larger than herself. Then it moves on. Zoe slides the boarding pass from beneath the tray and lays it flat on her thigh. The red mark seems brighter. Though the bulbs have not changed, she touches the edge with 2 fingers and notes how paper can feel like a sign when someone has taught you to read it. She does not yet ask for the meaning it hides. She stores the texture the way a field notebook stores bark rubbings and leaf shapes for later naming. She remembers a paragraph she read once about hidden codes in travel systems, how unofficial categories can live for years in the exported shadows of official documents. Growing teeth there, she will not let this one sink back into innocence now that she knows to look. The pitch of the engine slides. The captain returns to announce that weather is cooperative and the approach straightforward. Words meant to soothe and not quite managing it. Someone prays softly. Someone else narrates the math of missed connections, like an apology to an invisible calendar. The recorder keeps recording. A wash of breath fogs the lower edge of the phone's glass and clears again. In Zoe's mind, the file becomes a little framed rectangle with a name of letters and numbers, a thumbnail that holds a whole aisle. She thinks again of the laptop in Heather's hands and feels the clean physical fact of a door closing at the end of a hallway. She does not give the feeling a larger name. A closed door is a closed door. She stands there in herself and chooses not to knock yet, because there is a difference between knocking and battering a thing that will not open. She counts the hinges in her head. She notes the screws. She marks the grain She chooses to remember words, sequence, looks, tone, posture. She keeps a ledger only she can see. Out the small oval window, the world lifts itself into features. Fields lie like puzzle pieces. Tree lines pretend at wilderness. A river draws a bright string through the patchwork. The highway carries cars that look like toys, each convinced of its own importance. The runways appear like calm gray bookmarks tucked into green. The city is not hers, but it understands arrivals, and that will have to be enough. The hush inside the cabin is not silence, it is attention. Wheels find ground with that soft, hard kiss that steals breath for a beat and then returns it. The body of the plane flexes as the landing gear receives the weight. Brakes gather what they need and release what they must. People let out the air they were holding as if they had been practicing for this unison. The captain thanks everyone for patience and uses the phrase, "Local authorities will meet the aircraft." That phrase cleans the floor and leaves it wet. Please remain seated until instructed. The click that ends the message carries more weight than usual, as if the words could not entirely clear the doorway. Heather squares herself toward the forward door, laptop held now like a document that needs a signature. No one can quite find. The recorder lowers her phone a fraction, jaw set in a line of quiet intent, then raises it again. The window passenger rubs his neck, discovering that bodies have their own justice. The aisle passenger breathes through the nose the way people do when trying to convince the body to remain a willing chariot. Zoe slides the pass back under the tray and smooths it with 2 fingers. The red mark sits where it sits, a tidy assertion. She looks at it as if cataloging a specimen. She looks at the aisle. She looks at the curtain. She looks at the door that has not yet opened. She imagines the hinge giving way, the jet bridge breath greeting the cabin, the smarter light, the floor reflecting faces both right side up and upside down. She lets readiness live in the body without asking it to announce itself. She will step when stepping is asked. She will speak when speech can carry weight. She will remain herself. The plane rolls, turns, waits. The seatbelt lights hold their law. Around her the dance begins, the one where people collect themselves without disobeying, tugging at bags and glancing toward compartments, and then pretending they did not. A law has entered the room, and they wish to be seen agreeing with it. The hum thins, the door clicks and wakes. The first crack of brighter air sneaks in and changes the taste of everything. Zoe feels the day move its pieces. Officers will come. Questions will follow. The camera will keep its quiet eye. Her wrists still remember the bite that is coming, and the breath that will carry her through it. She does not brace for the worst. She prepares for the truth. She thinks of the line again, the narrow place where a person can stand and not be moved except by choice. She places both feet there, as if the floor itself has asked for this particular footprint, and waits for the world to say what it thinks it is. The door opens to air that is brighter and colder, and the plane changes its voice. The hum that carried everyone here thins, then tightens, as if told to hold still. The jet bridge waits like a gray throat. Heather stands at the threshold with the laptop held level in both hands. A document, looking for a signature that no one seems able to provide. Across the aisle, the woman who has been filming lifts her phone a little higher and steadies her elbows against the armrests, patient as a tripod made of bone. 2 officers step in with the kind of practiced purpose that makes space wherever it goes. Their uniforms are the careful kind of blue that refuses to be dramatic. One breathes mint and winter. The other brings a trace of machine oil and wool, a workroom honesty that has nothing to do with performance. Their radios whisper to themselves, a private language of letters and names and codes, and the sound makes the cabin's air seem thinner. Zoe keeps her hands flat on either side of the tray, as if showing the plane her empty palms. The red mark on the corner of her boarding pass peeks from under plastic. Like a secret that does not know how to be fully hidden, she slides the pass deeper, so it will not flutter loose. She steadies her breath on the rail she has laid inside herself. Draw into a count that calms. Hold the center. Give it back slowly. The rhythm carries her one layer below panic, into a room where the body can still listen. The first officer's gaze moves down the aisle the way a cursor finds a word. It lands on her without hesitation. The second officer follows it and nods once to a rhythm no one else can hear. They pause at Heather's shoulder just long enough to accept a handful of phrases: security, concern, crew report, procedure. The words are placed in the air like items arranged on a scale to prove their weight. Then the officers turn as one and walk the last yards to Zoe's row. "Ma'am," the first officer says, even and practiced, "we need you to stand." Zoe keeps her eyes level. "I am seated and belted as instructed," she says, tone measured like water poured slowly. "What is the reason?" The second officer's hand hovers near her shoulder in a way that looks like readiness rather than threat. The first officer says, "Crew report again." He says safety and procedure, as if they will be enough. The recorder across the aisle raises her phone just a fraction, bringing all three faces into the same quiet frame. A small clock blinks in one corner of that glass rectangle and will not be argued with. Zoe unfastens her belt. The click is a note everyone recognizes and hears in their own way. She rises with the economy of someone who knows that standing can be a form of statement. Her legs obey. Her throat stays calm. The aisle passenger draws her feet backward to clear a narrow path and folds her hands near her middle, a reflex shaped by care. "Hands behind your back." The first officer says, "We will keep this quick." Zoe places one hand over the other at the base of her spine. Palms touching, fingers long and unlinked. She is careful with the shape of herself. The metal arrives with a ratcheting that feels more like a decision than a sound. The cuff closes on the fine bones of one wrist, then the other. No flourish, only finality. The chain finds its length and waits. The cuffs are too tight. She says, "It is not a plea, it is a fact placed on a table." "Noted." The second officer answers, like a clerk reading an entry back to the room. Heather does not look at Zoe. She watches the laptop's black surface, where a reflection has trapped the image of a bound girl in an aisle that will not widen. The woman with the phone keeps filming. Her wrists do not tremble. A child 2 rows back makes a small round sound, the kind you make when you find a shell cracked but beautiful. They move. The officers touch lightly at each elbow. A choreography meant to read as guidance instead of force. The chain taps bone with every step. Zoe minds her balance, and the knees she passes, and the bags that jut from the underseats like low cliffs. The man at the window stares at the armrest as if it has betrayed him. The aisle passenger meets Zoe's eyes, and then looks down at the white of Zoe's knuckles, her own hands, remembering something they have not named. The curtain parts with its soft, professional whisper and draws itself closed again, a chalk line that promises to be obeyed. In the forward cabin, faces. Remember the lesson of discretion. Richard Bennett pretends to study a newspaper that is now only a shield. He does not hide well. He sits inside the inconvenience, like a man expecting it to end when it remembers who he is. The jet bridge breathes a different air, metallic and faintly sweet, the scent of circulation through ducts and filters. Before admission to lungs, The floor is ribbed for wheels, indifferent to feet. Fluorescent light hums in a law that does not need to raise its voice. At the mouth of the bridge, the first officer says, "Stop," in a tone that believes the word is a piece of ground. He steps back half a pace to face her. His expression is the careful neutral of a man used to summarizing people into lines on forms. Zoe shifts her weight onto her heels to keep herself upright against the little tug of the chain. She feels warmth gather under the rim of the right cuff, a slow, steady bloom. That means skin has decided to speak. From the gate behind them, a voice calls, "She is just a kid." Another voice asks a woman to step back. A third voice says, "We are filming," and the sound of the words builds like weather. One system layering itself over another. They walk. The concourse is brighter, a corridor of polished tile that reflects the world with awkward honesty. Ceiling panels make a grid overhead. Far down the hall, a sign says, "Security," in black letters that do not apologize for their size. The mint scent of the officer's breath follows them. The radios scratch at the silence with the small arrogance of tools that know they are needed. They pass a poster about hydration, a bin for plastic, a quiet kiosk of gum and candy that looks ridiculous in this moment. Phones appear like pale moths along their path. A semicircle forms with no one quite admitting to it, the way water makes a shape around a stone. A woman in a denim jacket holds a paperback open, with her fingertip marking a sentence she may never return to. A man in a gray hood whispers, "Do not touch her," into the general air. The recorder from the plane keeps her distance but never loses the frame. Somewhere, a stroller wheel finds a groove between tiles and ticks until a hand lifts it free. Zoe looks down once, not to count seams this time, but to acknowledge the floor the day has chosen. The polish is good enough to make another Zoe upside down under her shoes. The upside-down girl moves when she moves. Small and unwavering, Zoe allows herself a thin thread of humor to keep the spine from bending. If this is the trick, then yes, there are two of me. One walks forward, one walks on her head. Both remain. The security office opens on a woman behind plexiglass, and a room smelling of disinfectant and a coffee pot that has worked too many shifts. A welded chair waits under light that makes everything too legible. A scale leans against a wall like a tired shoulder. A clock ticks with a confidence its size does not deserve. All of it she stores, the way she has stored every detail since the aisle, not in a drawer for anger but on a shelf for later use. "Sit," the first officer says, and the word tries to be a courtesy. Zoe sits. The chair receives her in the only way it knows. The chain finds an easy line. The cuffs push a secret deeper into skin. She does not change her breathing. She will not surrender the rail she has laid through her center just because this room insists on another track. The cuffs are too tight, she says again. Since facts improve by being repeated, we will address that. The second officer says, "It is a promise shaped like a placeholder." Blood declares itself in the next moment. A bright bead swells at the edge of the right cuff, hesitates as if testing gravity, then files. It makes almost no sound against tile. Yet, the room hears it, meaning lands where sound barely does. The woman behind the plexiglass flinches. She disappears and returns with a small box of gauze, as if she is presenting contraband to be blessed into legitimacy. "A supervisor arribes," as if the clock had conjured him. He wears a charcoal blazer and the posture of a man who prefers to locate problems on maps instead of in people. His expression is the narrow neutral that assists sleep. His badge offers a number that wants to be descriptive. He looks at Zoe, The way someone looks at a dataset they will be forced to summarize. He looks at the officers. He looks back at Zoe. He draws breath to begin a procedure that will understand itself as orderly. Zoe speaks first. "I would like to make a phone call," she says. The sentence fits her mouth like a key shaped by long intention. The room clicks around the decision. The supervisor glances at the clock and then at the officers. "One call," he says. He says it the way a person offers the last thing in a jar. He tells the woman behind the plexiglass to provide the phone. The coiled cord snakes through the slot and lies there, heavy with the memory of other hands. The first officer says the call will be recorded. The second officer says it must be brief. The supervisor says, "State your name for the record," and nods for the number. Zoe recites it cleanly, a line of digits that are also a direction home. The ringtone is thin and businesslike, the sound of a system that believes in patience as a civic virtue. On the fourth ring, a voice enters the room from somewhere else and belongs here at once. "This is Williams," the voice says, quiet and absolute. "Dad," Zoe says, "it is Meridian. You have my daughter in restraints." The voice says, "And it is not a question. Please provide your badge number, the name of your commanding officer, and the precise time and reason for her detention." Now, the supervisor looks at the clock and speaks a sequence of facts in a tone that has learned obedience from larger forces. He names his badge. He names his role. He names the minute as if minutes were coins he has been counting all his life. He repeats the crew report language and hears it sound thinner when it meets this voice. "Record those details." The voice says, "You are recording. I am recording. Keep your tone professional." Professional moves through the room like a filter, cleaning the air a fraction. The officers straighten without meaning to. The woman behind the plexiglass sets a pen to a form and fills lines she will not forget later. "You will permit medical attention for any injury caused by those restraints," the voice continues, each word laid as if it were a stone. "You will preserve all body camera footage, radio transmissions, and incident reports. You will not delete or overwrite anything. Do you understand?" "Yes," the supervisor says, and something in the yes reveals the relief of a man grateful for rules that tell him where to stand. "Return the phone to my daughter," the voice says. The handset is warm when Zoe takes it back. "I am here," she says. "Are you hurt?" he asks. "Minor," she says, a truth trimmed to the size of the moment. "We will handle the rest," he says. "Stay calm. You did nothing wrong." She breathes then, not because she had forgotten how, but because the sentence gives the breath a place to sit. "Repeat that," he says. She does, and again, until the words feel less like a shield and more like something that fits her exactly. "You will answer what you must," he says, "and ask for everything in writing. Do not sign anything without me or counsel on the line. If they refuse a reasonable request, repeat it and note the time." "Understood," she says. "Breathe," he says, and the word is an instruction, not a comfort. She obeys. The inhale lights her ribs from the inside. The exhale steadies the floor. "Tell them you need your wrists attended to now," he says. "Politely inform them I am on my way." He does not explain how. He does not need to. The call ends with a small electronic certainty that leaves the room a fraction larger. "Medical." The supervisor says, "Body camera log." He adds, as if discovering the language of stewardship in his own mouth. A medic arrives in a navy shirt with the clean smell of laundry and lemon. "Let me see," she says, and the key turns, and the cuff releases one more tooth. The brief relief burns worse than the pinch. Saline. Gauze. Alcohol that speaks its own alphabet. The bandage lies clean and white, honest under the lights. "Any dizziness?" The medic asks. "No," Zoe says. you will bruise. The medic says, keep them elevated when you can. The gauze pad that found the blood goes into a clear bag. A seal number is read out and written down and initialed. The chain of custody begins in small letters and careful pen strokes. The radio in the officer's shoulder crackles and murmurs and is told to wait. The supervisor writes in his ledger and rips a sheet along a perforation with a control that pleases him. He taps it twice on the counter before handing it to the clerk beneath the plexiglass. The taps are a rhythm that lets him remember himself as part of order rather than accident. Heather stands on the far side of the glass with the laptop resting like an argument. She speaks once, a low question about efficiency. The supervisor answers that they will be thorough, and the word sits in the room like a weight put in the right place. Zoe holds her spine against the welded back of the chair. She watches hands and forms, and the clock that insists on naming each second as if it were a witness. She hears the radios speak, and the pens scratch, and the bandage rasp. She thinks of the silver wing pin, and its warm, small fact under her collar that morning. She thinks of the red mark on the boarding pass, and the way a simple color can be trained into a category people pretend not to see. She thinks of the recorder's steady frame, and the little clock in the corner of a screen that cannot possibly understand how important it is, and yet is. She breathes and lets readiness be quiet. The day has changed its shape again, and she does not change what matters. She sits where they have put her, lifts her wrapped wrists a fraction the way the medic suggested, and remains herself. Outside the office glass, the concourse moves like a slow river. Inside, the room arranges itself into a ledger. She will later read back to anyone who needs it. The door will open again. The next room will have new light and new questions. She will carry the same answer. The room holds its bright breath, while the medic smooths the last edge of bandage and tucks the tape with a practiced thumb. Lemon and clean cotton linger over Zoe's skin. The open cuffs rest on the metal desk like small jaws that have nothing left to learn. The clock keeps ticking with a modest confidence. As if time were a tool, the room had signed out and intended to return in good order. Footsteps arrive along the corridor with a pace that turns tile into a drum. Two men step through the doorway in the quiet way people do when they have already been announced. By the way, the air changes. The taller one wears a navy suit that understands work. The other carries the gravity of a person who writes procedures and then lives inside them. The supervisor straightens without quite deciding to. The officers shift their weight to attention. Zoe keeps her shoulders level and lets the room tell her who these men are before their names arrive. Counsel, the supervisor says, as if clearing his throat into a more careful language. The shorter man places a slim folder on the counter and opens it with fingertips that do not waste motion. The taller man speaks without raising his voice. Body cameras, badge numbers, preserve everything. Authority lives in his verbs. Pens answer with the scratch of compliance. The shorter man turns to the clerk behind the plexiglass. Intake packet, log sheet, chain of custody pages. His tone is precise without becoming sharp, the cadence of a person who does not confuse calm with permission. Pages slide under the slot, crisp enough to make sound. The clerk stamps the top sheet with a red seal that thunks the counter, an honest noise that lets the room exhale. Zoe watches the seal land beside her name. The letters sit straight, her life reduced for a moment to geometry that can be carried. The shorter man draws a line through a box marked description of injury and writes what the medic has already spoken aloud. He does not narrate, he captures. The taller man steps to Zoe's side. "Ms. Williams," he says, nothing extra, nothing speculative. His gaze takes in the bandages. the drying dot circled on the tile. The open cuffs turned sideways like teeth set down to rest. He nods to the medic, who has left her kit open like a small white suitcase packed with honesty. She nods back, the powder on her gloves lifting a faint cloud when she peels them away. "We will secure all recordings immediately," the taller man says, turning to the supervisor. "Your policy requires download and storage to a protected system. Begin now." The supervisor answers that he will. He points, and one officer begins the work with the tired steadiness of someone who understands that rules, for once, are the safest place to stand. Zoe feels the rail she laid through herself this morning align with another, steel against steel. The distance between them narrows until the train of her thoughts can ride without lurching. The shorter man places a small recorder on the counter and clicks it on. "For the record, state your name and role." The supervisor speaks both as if reading from the inside of his own eyelid. Badge numbers follow. Then the minute the restraints were applied, the minute they were loosened, any witnesses present. Each answer lands where it belongs. Each one is a nail set flush. A phone rings, civil and insistent. The clerk checks the supervisor's face. "Answer," he says. She listens, covers the receiver with her palm, and reports that the airline has sent someone from operations. She uses the word like a passport. "Bring them in." The taller man says. A woman in a sober jacket steps through. Her posture belongs to checklists and cockpits. Her hair is tied back without apology. She looks at Zoe the way a mechanic looks at a wing that took stress and held. "Ms. Williams," she says, voice low. I am here from operations. We are preserving flight data, crew communications, and gate logs." She does not seek Heather. She looks instead at the black lid of the laptop set aside on the desk, now a dull mirror. She meets the supervisor's eyes. "We request immediate duplication of camera feeds from the jet bridge and the concourse outside this office." She names camera positions like a litany she learned in the hallway. Letters and angles and lenses. Radios twitch as if they have heard their own names. "Approved." The supervisor says. He is not careless with the word. He keys his radio, repeats the request, and adds his own name to it. The clerk pulls a form with a field labeled custodian and writes a name that has weight in this building. She reads the exact time as she writes it, the way a person reads a note before sliding it under a door. The operations woman lays a tablet on the counter. A grid opens, small rectangles like gates or chess squares. She taps one and a line of text blooms along the bottom. She speaks the line aloud. "Date, time, camera code." Short description without flourish. Record is action, not memory. She does not wait for permission that was already given. The shorter man turns to Zoe. "You will receive copies of every form before anything leaves this room." He looks to the medic. "Please bag the used gauze under seal and initial the corner. Speak the seal number for the log." The medic complies with calm efficiency. Letters and numbers read aloud become ink, and ink becomes custody. The taller man lifts his phone and photographs the open cuffs with the same careful attention someone might give a horizon, except this light is fluorescent and the subject is unromantic. He photographs the marks at Zoe's wrists without exploitation, because truth is owed a record. He lowers the phone and looks at the supervisor. "We will require crew statements, a list of passengers seated near Ms. Williams, and radio transcripts from the first turbulence announcement through arrival at the gate." "Understood," the supervisor says. A junior officer appears in the doorway like an idea that has been called for. He accepts the list and vanishes with a half-run that remembers to look calm. The operations woman lifts the tablet to her ear and speaks with a tone that could strip paint from metal, not by volume, but by clarity. Ground all flights for safety review. She says, there is a beat while she listens, and then she adds the two words that turn suggestion into protocol. Effective immediately. Zoe hears the sentence and feels the room grow larger, as if someone opened a window in a place that had forgotten air could move. The temperature does not shift. Intención does. She sets her wrapped wrists gently on her knees. The medic adjusts one edge where fabric wanted to rub. Thank you, Zoe says. The word falls into place, like a brick in a wall that will stand. The supervisor starts a fresh page in his ledger. He writes the time again, writes the names that have earned their place, writes request identifiers that will later be haunted by reporters and lawyers, and the memory of a public that has learned to ask the right questions. The door opens a careful hand's width. Heather stands at the threshold, no longer holding the laptop. Her face is a sheet of neutrality that has been up too late. She looks past Zoe to the operations woman, then to the taller man whose attention feels like a report card. Heather speaks before anyone invites her. The device is powered down and intact, she says. She sets it on the counter with both palms, like proof that gravity still works. Chain the device. The taller man says to the shorter, document the handoff. Record the serial, the condition of the casing and the ports. The shorter man produces evidence, stickers, and a seal envelope. He photographs the device closed, then barely open, then sealed. He reads the serial aloud and writes the letters and numbers in the right fields. The bag crackles as adhesive meets itself, a tiny thunder that feels permanent. Heather stays at the line she has been told not to cross. Her hands fold, unfold. She looks at Zoe, as if surprised to find the girl still present when the story has begun to grow larger than the room. The operations woman meets Heather's gaze without flinching. Crew statements, she says, and the code applied to the boarding pass. Heather's jaw tightens. She nods once and steps back into the hallway. A retreat that does not know whether it is strategy or gravity. The door eases shut. The clock insists on its next minute. Quiet settles for a span long enough to be earned. Fluorescent hum. A pen forming a letter. A radio thinking out loud in another room. The operations woman scrolls her tablet and checks acknowledgments that arrive like pulses, little confirmations that the sky has agreed to hold still until the ground is ready. The taller man turns to Zoe. You missed your interview, he says. It is not a question, and it does not ask for apology. Zoe nods. The rail inside her takes the weight. He taps the folder and sets it flat. There will be other doors, he says. He does not predict timelines. He does not sell comfort. He names a fact and places it within reach. The junior officer returns with warm paper from a machine down the hall. The supervisor reads, then distributes copies. One for counsel, one for operations, one for the clerk, one for himself. Pages land with soft breaths. The lines list camera identifiers and time windows and titles of files that will soon exist on sealed drives with initials along the edges. The shorter man asks for original audio of the captain's announcements and the interphone calls, not summaries. Originals. He uses the word like a fragile element that will evaporate if uncapped too long. The supervisor writes the request with larger strokes, as if remembering that his handwriting appears in the history books of rooms like this. The operations woman places another call and asks for gate staffing logs, for the names of every agent who touched the manifest. For the precise moment, the red mark appeared on the printed pass. She asks for process, not story. She uses present tense because process is still running like a river while people argue about its source. The medic finishes her neat work and asks Zoe to lift her wrists a finger's breadth. Zoe does. The burn softens under a better angle. Keep them elevated when you can, the medic says, and somehow the sentence sounds like advice for more than one injury. Across the glass, the clerk slides a paper cup of water through the slot. Zoe holds it gently so the rim will not buckle. The water tastes like permission. She sets the emptied cup where it will not roll. The taller man rests his hand on the counter and leans half an inch closer. "Ms. Williams," he says, "if anyone asks you to sign, you ask for time. You ask for a copy. You ask for counsel on the line. Keep answers simple. Keep your breathing steady." His eyes drop to the bandages. Lift to the door. Return to her. He is not dramatic. He is specific. Specificity has always been the better form of hope. A murmur gathers beyond the door. The sound of motion trying to stay respectful. Someone says, "Press is collecting near the far checkpoint." Someone else mentions a family waiting. The operations woman lifts her gaze from the tablet and checks Zoe the way a person tests a bridge, with a careful step. "We will move you when the corridor is clear," the supervisor says, and this time his voice carries a faint regard that was not borrowed from policy. He looks at the clock, adds another line to the ledger, squares the book to the counter's edge. Zoe feels the silver wing under her collar as a remembered warmth rather than a piece of metal. She thinks of the hallway this morning and the almond scent that followed her father like a second coat. She thinks of the red corner on the pass and the instant when color turned into category. She thinks of the steady rectangle of the recorder's phone and the tiny clock in its corner that will one day speak its own testimony. She breathes. The room breathes with her. The rails draw so near that for a moment they feel like one. The taller man's phone vibrates once and rests. He glances, turns it face down, and returns to watching the doorway. The shorter man caps his pen and uncaps it again. A miniature metronome the clock chooses to accept. The door opens wider to admit two airport security managers and a technician rolling a cart. The cart carries a monitor and a row of neatly labeled drives. The technician plugs in. The screen wakes, and a grid appears. His hands move with quick respect until a square expands into the mouth of the jet bridge. Pale digits in a corner count the unarguable. He reads the time aloud. The room hears it twice, through speakers and through the throat that speaks it. The scene plays. Officers and a girl, a flight attendant at a distance with a laptop, a semicircle of phones, a stroller wheel that catches and is lifted free. The soundtrack is mostly air and steps, and the small metallic story of cuffs. No voiceover, no sales pitch, only witness. "Make a copy to secure media under seal," the taller man says. The technician slides a drive into a slot and begins the transfer. A progress bar walks across the screen with a patience that does not apologize. When it finishes, the technician reads a code, writes it on a label, and seals the bag. The shorter man repeats the code, initials the edge, and hands the pen to the supervisor, who adds his own mark. Link by link, agreement becomes law. The operations woman checks the last acknowledgments and lifts her eyes to Zoe. The nod means both we are not finished and you are not alone. The medic closes her kit. The officers stand where uniforms usually own the room and discover that today authority shares its weight. The supervisor closes his ledger and opens it again, remembering that this book has not reached its final page. "We will move," he says. The corridor is clear. He looks to counsel, who nods. He looks to Zoe. "Ready?" he asks. Zoe rises with care for the line of her back. Her wrists are wrapped and free. The chain on the desk does not claim her. The door opens, the air beyond tastes the same, and yet it carries a purpose she can name. She steps forward. The record remains behind her like a path that will not be erased. The rails hold. The world makes room. And somewhere beyond the hallway and the press and the future pages, a sentence waits like a door that will open when it hears her approach. There will be other doors. The quiet room receives them like a page turned without a crease. Fluorescent light holds steady, a pale weight on the table, where copies and seals wait in small, orderly stacks. Zoe sits where she can see the door. Her wrapped wrists rest at sternum height, angled the way the medic advised. Bandages, like white parentheses around a sentence not yet finished. Operations takes the chair to her right, tablet face down as if taming a restless animal. The taller counsel stands at the end of the table, with the posture of a person who respects straight lines. The shorter counsel uncaps his pen and leaves the cap beside his notebook, a tiny ritual that says, "We begin again." Outside the glass, the corridor moves at half speed, a terminal finding its manners. Inside, air carries that faint server hush, the practical breath of machines doing exactly what they were built to do, somewhere beyond a partition. Keys speak in quick, precise bursts. The sound is not dramatic, only honest. It says that data is being turned into sentences. The supervisor enters, ledger under his arm, and nods once to each person as if counting them onto a lifeboat. With him is a technician in a gray polo who rolls a small cart holding sealed drives like loaves of bread, labels tidy at the edges. The cart's wheels whisper across the vinyl and come to a stop flush with the table's corner. The technician parks his hands on the handle and waits for his name to be written before he speaks. A man who knows that process has a voice, and it is not his. Heather appears behind them at the threshold. She holds herself with that careful neutrality that worked in the aisle until the world grew teeth. In her hand is a thin folder, the paper inside as straight as ironed shirts. She does not cross the line of tape on the floor that someone has placed while Zoe was led here. She stands inside her side of the room and offers the folder across air like a bridge. She is no longer allowed to walk. Crew training excerpts. Heather says, coding references for gate procedures. Operations gestures to the technician, who steps forward to receive the folder as if it has temperature. He photographs the seal, reads the internal reference code aloud, and sets the folder down exactly in a rectangle, already cleared for it. The shorter counsel writes the code in clean ink and draws a small square beside it, a box that expects a signature later. The supervisor opens his ledger, writes a line, and underlines the time with a softened pencil. The graphite makes a modest shine across the paper, a dull river under a small sun. Zoe watches how the axe land. Each placement feels like a nail sunk without splintering. Her breath keeps to the count she knows. In for a measured span. Hold a grain of stillness. Out, longer than in. The rhythm travels through the bandages and settles the heat there. She does not look at Heather for long. She takes in the set of the mouth, the pulse in the neck that betrays a faster tempo than the face will allow, and returns her focus to the table. Dignity is carried. Her father said, she can feel the strap of it across her shoulders. Nothing like a burden, more like the weight of a bag packed correctly. Open the folder, please, the taller counsel says to the technician. The voice is not cold. It is correctly tempered. Pages, slide, and fan. A modest paper weather. The technician sets them in 2 stacks. Training passages on this side, procedural diagrams and matrices on that. Operations flips her tablet and brings the camera to life, photographing not just the words but the edges, the staples, the holes along the spine where a different binder once claimed the set. She speaks file names as she makes them, words sewn with dates and precise terms. The tablet hums in answer, pleased with how tidy it has been asked to be. There, Operations says. She taps a chart that spans 2 pages. Columns of codes match to outcomes like a deck of cards laid face up. The upper right quadrant carries a notation bound in a thin double frame. It does not appear on the official matrix. She says, "Fingerhovas," careful not to touch the paper. This mark requires a printer rule to place it. The room feels the hinge turn. The shorter counsel lifts his head. "Which printer rule and whose permission set?" he asks, already writing the question at the top of a blank page and underlining it once. The supervisor writes the same question in his ledger, without looking up, his pencil brisk in the groove. 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 Of lines newly alive. Heather says nothing. She does not lower her eyes, and she does not raise them for rescue. For a breath, her practiced neutrality thins enough to show the gap where habit ends. She reached the end of a script without finding a line that saves her. The sentence sits in the room like a pane of glass no one touches. The keys in the room beyond pick up speed. Somewhere a log opens. Somewhere a permissions ladder unfolds. The sound carries no triumph, only stamina. It says, "Patience builds spine." Zoe's fingers tingle under gauze, and then quiet. The technician clicks a drive into a docking bay. A small, clean sound like a zipper finding true. The monitor on the cart wakes against its plastic cover and shows columns that will never be broadcast, but will settle arguments in better rooms. The technician scrolls, stops, scrolls again. The fine movements of a tradesman who takes pride in not overshooting the mark. He turns the monitor toward operations, and a ribbon of notations shows the times when boarding passes printed at the gate, each event edged in metadata like lace. One entry at mid-morning carries an extra field. There, the technician says, then looks at the supervisor to be given permission to continue. The supervisor nods. The technician reads the line aloud. The words do not look like accusation. They look like architecture. At the end of the line, a code for a rule that is not standard. Beside it, a tag that suggests a local override. Who owns this rule? The taller counsel asks, and the question is a bridge crossed without hurrying. The technician taps another column, an audit trail in fine type. A username resolves. Initials that fit a human throat rather than a machine. The room does not swing to look at Heather. The room stays with the paper and the screen and the habit of staying with evidence until it becomes more than information. Operations speaks softly into her tablet. Request printer rule tree from systems. Pull last month of local overrides by gate and user. The words are bolts driven home. She waits for the tablet's little chime and keeps her eyes on the blue ring along the edge that tracks a progress bar. No one else can see. The ring fills. The tablet shakes once in her hands. A heartbeat of proof. She opens the file that arrives and lays it beside the training chart. The lines match where they should not. Zoe exhales and feels the line between anger and clarity sharpen. Her mind arranges the day into a lattice that carries weight. The red mark that first lived as a feeling beneath glossy paper now lives as a rule inside a machine that someone pointed at her. She keeps her face level, not turned to Heather's corner or to the door through which the world will eventually enter with microphones. She watches the counsel's pen, the supervisor's pencil, the technician's steady cursor. A system that wanted to hide inside faces has been coaxed into showing its wiring. The shorter counsel turns the folder so that one paragraph faces the light and reads it aloud. He speaks the language of training without adding insult or comfort. The paragraph promises equal treatment and outlines corrective steps with clean, if-then statements anyone would be proud to own. Then he places one finger at the edge of a hand-scrawled note on the margin, a narrower script that does not match the typeset calm. The note says in plain words that a red mark should cue additional attention when profiles raise concerns. The word profiles carries no definition. The ink is fresh enough to have lived this week. Who wrote this? The shorter counsel asks. The technician photographs it with a ruler placed alongside for scale. The supervisor writes the question as a line rather than a box, a path he intends to follow, rather than a container he expects to fill on the spot. Heather's face tightens for a blink, the involuntary kind that gathers the muscles just enough to hold a thing still. She inhales and places her palms flat at her sides, as if to keep herself standing. She looks at operations, and then at the taller counsel, and then at the paper again. She says the note belongs to a training refresh drafted by a peer and reviewed by her manager. She gives names without adjectives, dates without embellishment. She does not say the word intention. The room receives each answer and pins it to the board with a neutral thumb. Bring the manager. The taller counsel says to the supervisor. The voice that carries the order is not loud. It is weight-bearing. The supervisor speaks into his radio, a conversational tone that gives its words more power than a shout would. He requests the manager to report with the signed revision trail. He reads the time so the air can hear it. Zoe's pulse smooths. The rails of her breath and the rails of the room ride together. The keys beyond the wall continue their patient run. The technician produces a final sheet from the printer tray on the cart, a narrow receipt for the rule export, and slides it into a clear sleeve. He reads the hash aloud. Each block of characters turned into words longhand. No place for a slip of tongue. The shorter counsel repeats it back exact. Echo is a kind of safety. The recorder from the plane slips in like a punctuation mark, quiet and necessary. She does not lift her phone this time. She stands by the interior window and looks at the vending machine, light reddening a row of gum, as if to remind herself that not everything is choreography. Operations turns her tablet so Zoe can see one frame paused at the mouth of the jet bridge. A small rectangle of a red corner is visible between Zoe's fingers. In that moment, bright as a wound, small as a stamp, you were not mistaken. Operations says simply, then she turns the tablet away and sets it down as if the fact should live beside the others and not on top of them. Heather's shoulders soften a whisper, not relief, not collapse, just the body, letting go of a pose it cannot hold forever. She keeps her mouth shut. Silence is sometimes obedience and sometimes strategy. Today, it is the result of a ladder pulled up by the person who climbed it. The supervisor's radio pops and delivers a line about a manager 5 minutes away with a folder and a face like a sermon. He repeats the line in shorter words and writes manager en route. The technician seals the last drive and hands the pen to the shorter counsel, who initials with the care of someone engraving. Zoe lifts her wrists a little higher per the medic's instruction. The burn recedes another breath. Outside the glass, a child laughs at something as simple as a rolling bag that refuses to obey. Inside, the room's hum feels almost kind, a choir of machines holding pitch. The taller counsel looks at Zoe and lets his eyes rest there long enough to be felt. This is the shape of the pattern, he says, not as conclusion but as a map. We follow it. Zoe nods once. She does not indulge triumph. She does not carry hate. She keeps to the rail. The count, the work. She lets the system teach on the record what it tried to practice in the dark. The door will open again soon, and a person with a revision trail will sit where Heather stands. The keyboard will take another breath. The server will hum its patient chord. She will stay in her chair and remain herself. The room keeps its steady light, as if it has decided to be a witness. Zoe sits where she can see the door and the interior window, her wrapped wrists resting a little higher than her heart the way the medic suggested. The bandages look like small white parentheses holding her pulse inside its sentence. Operations waits at her right with the tablet asleep beneath her palm. A leash on a quiet animal. Counsel stand like bookends at the far side of the table. Taller with a folder open to a fresh page. Shorter with his uncapped pen, and the kind of patience that trusts nouns more than adjectives. Footsteps arrive with the soft insistence of felt on tile. The supervisor returns with a man in a slate blazer carrying a red folder that could be a verdict. Manager for gate and boarding systems, the supervisor says as he writes the title into the ledger. The manager nods to the room without offering ownership. He takes the chair that faces the documents rather than the people. Operations wakes the tablet with a tap, the blue of its screen washing her knuckles. Her voice is level. The mark on the boarding pass is not in the official matrix. We need the path that produced it, who created it, who approved it. And when it was deployed, the manager folds his hands as if to pen his own moderation. He says the mark is an internal cue for delayed verification, a limited trial in a limited environment to improve performance. He says it was not meant to be visible. He says the word pilot, as if the word could absolve intent. He avoids the word profiling, as if it might stain. The shorter counsel does not look up. He writes the phrase, limited environment, and draws a small box around it, then an arrow to the clean blank where approval authority will soon live. He circles the word pilot once, as if to remind the page not to be impressed. The taller counsel says, revision trail. The manager breaks the brass fastener and fans the first pages until signatures show like small flags along a ridge. He names a systems director, a risk director. Himself, he says training reminded staff of non-discrimination practice. He speaks reminder as if repetition changes a design. Operations photographs, each signature and the edges and the binder holes, naming file numbers as she makes them. The technician steps in with a clear sleeve and a seal, waits for the nod, then slides the papers inside. The adhesive answers itself with a small, honest crackle. The supervisor writes the time and draws a thin underline beneath it, a quiet oath to keep the page straight. Zoe holds to the rail of her breath, in for a measured span, hold a grain of stillness, out longer than in. The count steadies the heat under the gauze. She lets the room move around her and does not move with it until her movement would matter. The recorder from the plane has taken a place by the interior window where her phone is steady without being intrusive. She is a rectangle that keeps its promise. The shorter counsel turns to a set of training pages and finds the margin note they unearthed before dot. He lays a ruler alongside and reads aloud. So the language must answer the air. A red mark should cue additional attention when profiles raise concerns. The word profiles does not define itself. It sits on the paper like a match head that has already remembered fire. Who wrote this? He asks without heat. The manager says a senior trainer added the line to capture a discussion point in a working draft. He says it should have been removed before circulation. He says the final release does not include the phrase. He says the working copy was misfiled. He uses the passive the way some people use perfume, not to tell the truth but to change the scent. The supervisor writes senior trainer marginal note and underlines the phrase misfiled with a pencil that makes a dull sheen. He reads the time to the room, as if the air itself keeps a law. Operations scrolls into the rule tree. Here, she says, gate printer override. The audit trail resolves into names and letters, and the small march of time across a line, a username appears. The same letters they have followed through other notes. A timestamp sits beside the minute, a copy of Zoe's pass printed with a red corner. A reason field stands blank like a mouth choosing not to speak. She angles the tablet so the manager can see his reflection not quite align with the characters. Explain the blank reason field. The taller counsel says, optional in a pilot. The manager answers, Steph may skip under pressure. The rule did not alter seat authority. He adds, and could not move a passenger. Outcomes belong to personnel. He does not say accountability. He does not say fault. He points the weather at people and calls the barometer neutral. Heather stands inside her own silence near the door, hands folded. That practiced neutrality shows its seam and holds anyway. She disables the rule after the diversion. The technician notes, reading from a log where a second username initiated a rule disable when operations sent its alert. He does not accuse. He places a stone on a path already visible. The supervisor writes disabled by crew and marks a small triangle beside it, a sign he uses when pressure meets policy. The legal woman from Airport Authority enters with a thin laptop that clicks into the monitor like a thought finding its ending. On the screen, an interphone timeline opens, slender timestamps down the left, speaker codes in modest print, a narrow waveform sliding like a river under snow. She taps a moment and plays the captain's unscheduled stop. The cabin phrase, we have reason, the places where voices become policy. She exports the audio, seals the drive, reads the code aloud, and waits for echo. The shorter counsel repeats each block of letters cleanly. The supervisor writes it down. Redundancy holds the door. The manager clears his throat and says the pilot sought to improve compliance. He says, any misuse is a training issue. He says he welcomes oversight. The words are a rope let out slowly. Not to save someone, but to lower them to a place where the drop looks less steep. Was the pilot disclosed to unions or regulators? The shorter counsel asks, internal. The manager says, and lets the word pretend it is a shield. The supervisor writes, notify oversight, in a hand that leaves no room for argument. Operations puts the tablet to sleep and addresses the manager without raising her voice. The code appeared on a teenage girl's pass. She does not add adjectives. She does not look for effect. The sentence makes its own weather. No one speaks for a beat. The fluorescent hum fills the space. Outside the glass, a vending machine returns a bill, and a small cheer rises. That has nothing to do with justice, and everything to do with being seen by a dumb machine. Inside the room, the clock continues to name seconds, as if they are precious, because they are. The taller counsel flattens a palm on the red folder. This is a hinge, he says. The next rooms will want names and rules and dates that do not wobble. Preserve everything. Suspend the pilot in writing. Provide the approval tree. He looks to the supervisor. Secure the gate workstation and image its drive now. The technician lifts a case from under the cart and begins the clean ritual of a forensic capture, cable seated. Checksum read like scripture. Zoe feels the structure take weight in front of her. She does not feel triumph. She feels the relief that arrives when someone decides to build with level and plumb rather than rumor. The pin under her collar is a small, remembered warmth, a bright coin pressed against bone. She keeps her chin level. She watches hands, not faces. She watches the movement of ink and the stubborn neatness of the seals. She remains a fact in a chair. The manager asks to speak off the record. The shorter counsel says no. The taller counsel offers the two doors that matter, on the record or silent. The manager looks at his own signature and chooses quiet. The choice is a sound the room hears without having to say it out loud. The recorder steps closer to Zoe's shoulder and waits until Zoe meets her eyes. "I will keep the original safe until counsel takes it," she says softly. It is not a promise for applause. It is a brick in a useful wall. "Thank you," Zoe says, and uses the smallest possible amount of voice to carry the words across. Operations turns the tablet again, just long enough to show a paused frame at the jet bridge, where the red corner peeks from Zoe's fingers, bright as a small wound, exact as a stamp. "You were not mistaken," she says, and turns the screen face down, so the fact can live beside the others instead of on top of them. The supervisor closes his ledger and opens it again. A habit now, a way to say, "We are not finished." He writes, "The corridor is clear," and notes the time. He looks to counsel. He looks to Zoe. "Ready?" he asks, and his mouth shapes the word with a care he has learned in the last hours. Zoe stands. The bandages are still white. Her wrists are hers. The chain remains on the desk like a memory that will not be invited forward. The blue tub fills with sealed things that refuse to forget. Operations falls into step at her shoulder. Counsel lift the folder and the drives. The legal woman coils her cable and guards the small rectangle of sound inside its bag. The manager stays seated with the red folder now lighter by more than paper. Heather holds her quiet and watches the system she served take attendance of itself with dates and rules and names that do not wobble. They move into the corridor. The terminal air is the same temperature it was before, but people wear it differently. A man who had stared earlier now meets Zoe's eyes and nods because witness has learned a shape. A woman in a denim jacket lowers her book and presses it to her chest as if to keep a page from blowing away. Somewhere, a child asks why the planes are resting, and a parent answers something gentle that is also true. At the bend where a pane of glass shows a narrow slice of runway and a kneeling sky, Operations walks close enough that Zoe can feel her presence without touching. "Louder rooms will come," she says, "and we will meet them prepared." She does not offer comfort. She offers a plan. Zoe inhales and holds and lets go. The breath fits the space they are making. Behind her, the record keeps its own pace. Ahead, a door with frosted glass and a brass handle waits, rubbed pale by years of hands. The taller counsel reaches it and holds it without ceremony. The supervisor notes the time again because the ledger prefers to be fed and the clock is happy to oblige. Zoe crosses the threshold. The light in the next room is softer at the edges. Not kinder, only less theatrical. She does not mistake light for justice. She sits when asked, lifts her wrists as instructed, and waits to answer where answers will live on paper. Outside, a runway holds its line without needing applause. Inside, the pattern has a name and a trail, and the day turns on its hinge toward rooms that no longer pretend this was only a girl and a gate. It was a code and a choice and a system, and now it is a record. She keeps to the rail. She remains herself. The next room is arranged to make truth visible. Rows of chairs face a long table with small microphones that glow when they are ready. A projector waits at the back, its lens turned toward a square of pale wall that has the look of a clean page. The carpet hushes footsteps. The light is even and without personality, the kind that does not flatter anyone. Zoe sits where she can see the wall and the door at the same time. Her bandaged wrists rest a little higher than her heart, the way the medic advised. and the burn settles into a warm, bounded line. Operations takes the chair to her right and settles a tablet face down as if taming a loyal animal. The taller counsel stands slightly off the table's edge, a posture of spare angles and exact verbs. The shorter counsel fans a stack of forms, so signatures will have nowhere to flee. The supervisor brings the ledger and sets it in front of the center microphone, with the respect a person gives a tool that has never once tried to be dramatic. The technician rolls in a cart with sealed drives, resting in a blue tub, small boxes that have learned the trick of not forgetting. The legal woman from airport authority clips a cable from cart to projector and waits for the beam to breathe. Heather stands against the side wall, neutrality pinned to her face like a badge that has grown heavy. The manager with the slate blazer holds a red folder as a person might hold a door he is not sure he wants to open again. The recorder from the plane has taken a seat at the aisle and set her phone in her lap. A few airport staff line the back row, lanyards dull against uniforms, and two passengers sit with the patience of people who have decided that watching can be a kind of work. We are on the record, the supervisor says. He touches the microphone. A small red eye wakes, and he speaks the time and the place and the names that have earned seats in this light. He reads the seal number on the first drive. The shorter counsel repeats it. The legal woman repeats it again. Echo lays a straight hallway for information. The technician breaks the seal and docks the drive with a click that sounds like a period. A rectangle of gray opens on the wall and sharpens until the mouth of the jet bridge appears. All lines and steel and reflected air, pale digits tick in one corner like a witness that never blinks. The technician speaks the timestamp. The room hears it once through a speaker and once through a living throat. On the wall, officers move with practiced purpose. A girl walks between them with her hands at her back. A flight attendant holds a laptop at a distance, the way one might hold a document waiting for a signature that refuses to arrive. Phones lift at the edge of the frame, a stroller wheel catches and is lifted free. The sound is only air and shoes, and the small metallic grammar of cuffs. No voiceover, no flourish. The truth does not ask for adjectives. Hold there, the taller counsel says. The image freezes at the moment the polished tile makes a second Zoe appear upside down beneath her feet, a twin living in gravity. The red corner of a boarding pass flashes near the girl's fingers, sharp as a stamp, bright as a wound. Operations wakes the tablet, photographs the projection with the seal number and the pale clock in the corner, and names the file aloud so the room can hear it being born. Zoe watches the still frame and does not look away. She does not turn toward the manager or toward Heather. She keeps to the rail she laid inside herself, breath steadied by its count, anger narrowed to something useful. The legal woman lifts the drive with interphone audio. She reads the label and the hash in clean syllables. The shorter counsel repeats both. The supervisor writes them into the ledger and underlines once a small oath of caretaking. A thin strip of wave opens on the wall, sound turned into a river. She taps a point, and the cabin voice says, "We have reason," in a tone that wants to wear professionalism like a coat. She taps another, and the cockpit voice says, "For your safety, we will make an unscheduled stop." The playback is not dramatic. It is arithmetic. Operations calls for the gate cameras next. The beam shows the corridor outside the security office, the walk under fluorescent breath. The moment a bright drop chooses to fall and meets tile with hardly any sound and all the meaning. Later, the medic's hands, gauze, a clear bag sealed with a crackle, the number read and echoed. The neat initials that make a chain. The supervisor flips a page, and writes as if squaring the book to the table could square the day. Manager, the taller counsel says, and the title sounds like a name now. He nods to the legal woman, who opens the red folder under the lens. The projector throws signatures across the wall. A systems director, a risk director, an implementing authority whose name belongs to the man in the slate blazer. Dates sit beside ink with the calm of people who believe they are permanent. The shorter counsel reads them aloud, and does not add even a grain of commentary. Operations mirrors the tablet. A rule tree blooms like a shy plant. Gate printer override opens an audit trail. A username resolves. The same shape they have followed through other pages. A timestamp finds the minute a copy of the pass printed with a red mouth in the corner. The reason field beside it stands blank. An empty square that tells on itself, who owns this rule? The taller counsel asks, voice even. The manager's throat tightens a beat. He says the pilot is paused. He says the reason field is optional under pressure. He says the rule did not change seat authority and could not move a passenger. Outcomes belong to personnel. He does not say bias. He does not say harm. He offers shape without weight. The shorter counsel lays a training refresh on the glass. The paragraphs are tidy and sincere. The handwritten note on the margin is not. He reads it aloud, so the wall must carry it. A red mark should cue additional attention when profiles raise concerns. The word profiles refuses to define itself. It sits there with its little match-head grin and waits for friction. Who wrote this? The shorter counsel asks. The manager says a senior trainer captured a discussion point and the line should have been removed before circulation. He says the working copy was misfiled. He does not say by whom. He holds the rope of the passive voice and lets it slide through his hands. Along the back row, a soft sound rises, not outrage and not relief, something closer to the chord people make when they recognize a pattern and finally have a name for it. The custodian leans his coil of cord against a chair and crosses his arms. The recorder glances at Zoe and then back at the wall. Her phone stays in her lap. Her eyes are enough. Operations lifts her mic without theatrics. The code appeared on a teenage girl's pass, she says. She does not raise her voice. The sentence is a placement, not a plea. The manager asks to speak off the record. The shorter counsel says no. The taller counsel offers the only two doors that matter, on the record or silent. The manager looks at his own approval grown large on the wall and chooses quiet. The choice clicks into the air like a latch. The legal woman slides a narrow receipt under the lens, a hash for the audio export typed in tidy blocks. She reads each character slowly. The shorter counsel repeats them without error. The supervisor writes and squares the ledger again. The technician begins a forensic image of the gate workstation in the corner. Cable to port. Checksum, read aloud. On the wall, a progress bar walks forward, with a patience that does not apologize for itself. Zoe breathes. The room breathes with her. Her wrists remember bite and relief, and the clean logic of gauze and seal and signature. She does not confuse a record with a verdict. She understands this is how you build a stage where justice can stand without wobbling. The supervisor invites Heather to the microphone. She steps, as if expecting the carpet to argue. She states her name and role. She confirms that she disabled the rule after the diversion to freeze the situation. She does not volunteer why the situation needed freezing. She does not turn toward Zoe. The wall does not turn toward her. It keeps the frame with the bright red corner and the patient clock. The taller counsel asks the manager whether any departure metrics were active during the pilot. The manager says efficiency targets are standard. He says, No one is rewarded for discriminatory action. He says words that policies can print in calm fonts. He does not answer the question he was asked. The shorter counsel underlines the word internal on his copy with an ordinary pencil, and the scratch is louder than it should be, a sound that refuses to be muffled. A woman lifts a hand at the back and leaves it up when doubt tries to push it down. The supervisor nods. She says she works the early gate shift and saw the same red mark when things ran tight. She says the mark made her stomach feel wrong. She does not accuse any one person. She names a pattern. The supervisor thanks her and takes her name for the record. The shorter counsel writes her statement on a clean line and leaves room for a signature. The progress bar reaches its end. The technician reads the checksum. The legal woman echoes it. The shorter counsel matches it beat for beat. The sealed copy slides into a sleeve, and the seal answers itself with a crackle that sounds final. The blue tub receives it. The ledger receives its number. The room exhales a fraction. Operations turns the tablet, so only Zoe can see a message from a university address that offers a new window for an interview. The words are not pity. They are a door. Zoe does not smile. She lets the small heat remain small and useful, a quiet fuel she can spend when it will matter. Does any party have anything further to place on the record at this stage? The supervisor asks. The taller counsel says, "Preservation continues," and statements will follow under letterhead before close of day. The shorter counsel adds nothing. Operations states that the pilot is suspended pending review. The legal woman notes that an internal inquiry is open and external notification underway. The technician says the image is complete and verified. Heather remains still. The manager remains quiet. The recorder sits with her phone resting in her lap and lets the silence take its proper shape. The supervisor touches the microphone, and the red eye goes dark. The projector beam narrows and disappears. The room releases a breath it did not know it was holding. Outside the door, the terminal resumes its ordinary rhythm. People walk with bags and decisions. A child asks if planes get tired. A parent answers that sometimes planes rest so people can be safer. And the simple truth is enough. Counsel gathers sealed drives and forms whose ink is still breathing. Operations tucks the tablet under her palm. The legal woman coils her cable, and the bagged rectangle of sound settles beside its siblings in the tub. The supervisor closes his ledger with a soft hush and rests his hand on the cover long enough to say thank you without saying anything. Zoe stands. The rail inside her holds. The record follows on wheels and under arms, and inside careful pockets, the air beyond the door feels the same against her face. The difference is not in the air. The difference is in the intention of the people breathing it. She steps into that intention. She does not perform. She remains herself. The atrium holds its tempered hum, a basin of glass and light where the afternoon pools without deciding to warm anyone. The tape line keeps its quiet border. Security breathes like furniture that has learned to be kind. Phones tilt and settle. The small speaker on the folding table remembers that sound should be simple. Zoe stands where the carpet meets a run of stone. Her bandaged wrists elevated the way the medic asked. White parentheses holding the pulse steady. Operations hovers to her right with the tablet under one palm. A harness on a tool that wants to work. Counsel keep the shape of a doorway around her. Taller, half a step ahead. Shorter, with the folder tucked where it will not be dropped. The statement has already been given, and the microphones are dark. Still, the story keeps moving as if it has learned to walk on its own legs. The young agent steps forward with a breath that scuffs the tape line without crossing it. He carries a printed pass in a clear sleeve, the paper sitting obediently inside its plastic, like a fish pinned in perfect water. He says he logged it 3 days ago because the mark sat wrong in the stomach. Operations takes the sleeve with gloved hands, photographs the corners and the border text, reads the time in clean words so the room can hear the sequence fit, then slides the sleeve into a second bag and speaks the seal number for echo. The shorter counsel repeats the code, and the supervisor writes new exhibit in the ledger with 2 small lines beneath, not for drama, only to keep the eye from drifting. Phones ripple toward the agent and then back toward Zoe. The recorder in the aisle holds her frame and does not push. The communications woman thanks the agent in a voice that treats courtesy like a fact. The taller counsel gives him an address for statements and an instruction that his name will be protected until protections are true on paper. The agent nods. The way a person nods when their spine agrees with their mouth, the room makes room for him. A reporter's device vibrates with a small tidal sound. He reads, then walks to the communications woman and offers the screen, palms open. The message is from a systems contractor who says the rule set was shared to multiple gates with no end date recorded, and asks to speak to investigators and asks to do it correctly. The taller counsel reads twice and then hands back the phone with a request to forward to the intake address already spoken and repeated. Time sent is confirmed, time received is written, and the ledger takes another line without complaint. The floor does not shift beneath anyone. It simply remembers that weight can be borne if it is distributed. Ground control lifts a slice of the pause, and the radio near the tape line tells on itself with a careful voice. Flights will taxi in staged release from a far runway, while safety review continues in parallel. Operations listens with the bones, then repeats the phrase to the communications woman until the words fit the public mouth without tearing. Around the atrium, the screens blink and brighten, not into normal, but into a measured motion that feels like a competent hand on a valve. Zoe keeps still and lets the geometry do its work. The wing under her collar is a small warmth that belongs to the body now. The ache in her wrists is honest and bounded. She watches the faces more than the cameras. The woman from the early shift stands near a column with her hands wrapped in each other, and a kind of hope in her eyes that looks like a person hearing their own story, read back without edits. The custodian rests his coil of cord and takes a breath you can see in his throat. A child on a leash of webbing points at the dark microphones and asks whether they sleep when they are not read. The parent answers gently and looks at Zoe with a small nod that says, nothing more complicated than we saw and we will remember. An airport official arrives with a sheet still warm from a printer. The apology protocol draft smells faintly of plastic and hurry. Counsel read and send it back across the table with a finger on one paragraph. It will not be conditional. The taller counsel says it will state the act, the harm, the group, the sequence of repair with dates, a plus, a signature, and a name you can hold to account. He does not scold. He measures. The communications woman writes the measurement in her notebook as if it is a cut length of wood that must fit on the first try. The manager in the slate blazer orbits the edge of the scene with the red folder open to a page that owns his name. His face keeps trying on expressions the way a person tries keys in a lock. He begins a sentence about misunderstanding and context, and does not finish because the shorter counsel raises a hand and places the only rule that matters between them on the record or silent. The manager closes his mouth, and the carpet continues to be carpet, unseduced by the performance. Overreach has a way of mapping itself on a body. You can see it in the tendons. Heather stands 2 paces off the wall. The neutrality she pinned on this morning has learned its weight. It tilts and rights itself. She watches Zoe, and then the table, and then the red folder, and then the phones. For a beat, the face she will need later flickers through. A person standing at the door of rooms she will have to enter with her own hands. Then the beat ends and the mask returns. Not a lie, not quite a shield, more like a pause button that cannot stop time, only slow it. The communications woman signals a wrap, and the tape line loosens by inches. People do what people do when a scene changes, but the story is not done. They talk softly, they move toward coffee, they text small thunder into other rooms. The recorder lowers her phone and catches Zoe's eyes for a count. No words. The count is enough. The medic threads the crowd like a person who knows stillness is a treatment. She checks the edges of the bandages without unwrapping, finds one corner that wants to lift, presses it with 2 fingers, and tells the blood again that it is not the only thing in charge. In the side room with the frosted glass, Zoe sits for a breath and watches the taller counsel lay 2 documents on the table. The first is a plain statement of facts for an oversight body. The second authorizes counsel to receive communications on her behalf for a defined period, freeing her phone to be a phone and not a courtroom. He reads every line in a voice that keeps nouns clean and verbs honest. She signs both, not hurried, not hesitant, letters steady, as if they know they will be asked to stand alone someday. The shorter counsel witnesses with a stillness that has the dignity of a signature. The supervisor notes the filings in his ledger and squares the book to the table edge, a small act of respect for the rectangle that has agreed to carry this weight. The phone vibrates once and the taller counsel glances down. He answers and listens and nods and sets the device between them long enough for a voice to lay 3 short sentences in the room. Proud of you. Breathe. We move. The call ends before anyone can decide to make it longer. Zoe leans back and lets her shoulders acknowledge fatigue without surrendering to it. In for 4. Hold 1. Out for 6. Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. The rails inside her match the rails the day has laid under her feet. Outside, the atrium has found a new balance. Flights begin to creep like careful animals from the far runway. The public address admits that schedules have learned humility and thanks passengers for helping safety speak louder than hurry. The apology protocol draft makes another lap past the table and returns with edges that fit better. The red folder recedes to a corner of a bench and waits for a hand that will no longer protect it. The blue tub of sealed drives sits under the communications table like a manageable gravity. The contractor's email arrives in the intake box again, with attachments that open into logs that match the audit trails on the projector. A thin printer in the side room hums and parses and lays out pages with headers that already look official because the margins are clean. Counsel stack and stamp and sign. Operations tags and seals and reads numbers into the air so the room can hear the chain tighten. The supervisor writes the hash codes longhand and checks them against the labels. Redundancy makes a net, and nobody falls through. When they step back into the light, the crowd has thinned into people with places to be. A pilot with a dark cap passes, eyes forward, mouth neutral, and knocks the table leg once with the side of her boot. The way a person touches a talisman they do not wish to name. The early shift woman stands with a colleague now, and their shoulders angle together in the posture of people who have found a language. The child with the leash points at Zoe and asks whether planes forget how to land when they stop. The parent says no. They remember better when someone checks the math. The sentence is small and accurate, and the atrium accepts it. The communications woman gestures toward a second short statement. Not for the microphones. but for posts that will travel where phones are already telling each other. It is a dozen lines long and says only what can live under oath. It contains addresses for evidence, dates, and the phrase ongoing review in the most modest font on the page. It does not ask for faith. It asks for action and patience in equal measure. Zoe reads, nods once, and hands it back. The woman thanks her and does not linger on the gratitude. A ride waits at the curb. The supervisor closes his ledger and carries it like a book that will be read to children when they are old enough to want accuracy more than story. Operations keeps the tablet under her hand and walks with the gait of someone who has decided that the next room can be met at the right speed. Counsel shape the air around Zoe so drafts will not steal warmth. The recorder follows at a distance, not filming now, just walking, as if accompaniment is a partial remedy. At the door, a man in a service jacket holds the glass open and says he hopes the people who needed to hear heard. Zoe says yes. The word lands without fanfare and does not break. She steps into late sun that is all reflection off windshields and nowhere particular to stand. The car smells like air that has been filtered enough times to become religion. She settles and keeps her wrists high and watches the terminal slide behind in panels of steel and sky. The phone is a phone again. A message from the university sits with a window of dates that is generous without being indulgent. She does not answer yet. She lets the knowledge float and then settle, not as rescue, but as work waiting at a cleaner table. She thinks of the room with the projector and the quiet shock of the upside-down reflection. She thinks of the red corner and the blank reason field and the handwritten note that wanted to turn a match head into policy. She thinks of the agent's sleeve and the contractor's text, and the way procedure can become a weapon when carried by steady hands. The car turns onto the access road. A plane lifts like a promise made reasonable by physics. Counsel speaks softly about next steps, statements, interviews, letters, a cue that will not reward speed over care. The road hums with the arithmetic of tires. Zoe lets the hum wrap her, and does not confuse motion with noise. Execution is not spectacle. It is a sequence that respects names and times and the dignity of seals that crackle because they mean it. She breathes and keeps the line. The day has not offered triumph. It has offered structure and a community that learned in real time how to carry it. That is enough to cross into the last room. At the edge of the airport, the sign for the highway appears and then passes. Evening will find them at a table with clean paper and a reasonable lamp. The phone will ring for the right reasons. The wing at her collar will warm with the heat that belongs to people who choose rails over speeches. The next door is already visible in the mind. A corridor of brick and books and questions that listen. The world has been taught to look up. The record will walk beside her. She remains herself. Morning keeps its promise. It arrives plain and on time, with a small breeze that finds the curtains and lets them lift like a slow breath. The room smells of paper and soap and tea, an honest mix that does not try to be more than it is. Zoe wakes without a startle. The ache in her wrists has learned to speak more softly. The bandages are clean, the white of them a quiet instruction. She sits up and feels the mattress give the way a well-made chair accepts a body. No theater, just design. She pads to the kitchen and fills the kettle. The metal answers her with the lightest knock. She watches the water take on its first ripples and turns the flame low. A lesson practiced until it becomes instinct. While steam climbs in a thin line, she opens the window. Air with a hint of morning bread slips across the sill and touches the wing pin resting on the dresser. The pin glints, as if reminded that it once lived under sky. She eats without performance, toast that tastes like foundation, fruit that tastes like work done by someone far away, and paid by the hour, and deserving of more. She pours tea and lets it sit until it is exactly itself. She does not burn her tongue. She has no reason to rush. She sets her wrists on a folded towel, placed higher than the heart, the way the medic asked, and feels the blood cooperate rather than argue. The envelope from the university waits on the table. The paper looks different now, not a prize and not a test, more like a hinge that has been oiled. She has already sent her reply. Still, she rests a palm on the flap and measures the room. In her chest, the old rail hums in the pitch she knows. In for a count measured in words. Hold a grain. Give it back unstingy. The count is a bridge, not a cage. She dresses like herself. A soft shirt that has learned her shoulders. Dark slacks with seams that do not ask to be admired. Shoes made for the distance between doors. She takes the pin from the dresser and finds the collar without looking. The metal warms as it settles against cloth. She has worn it in rooms where it ruled, and in rooms where it listened. Today, it is allowed to be a small object among other small objects that matter. Her father texts while the kettle cools. He will meet her at noon for a walk that is not a meeting. Coffee is a promise, not a bribe. He writes as a father and as a citizen in the same sentence, because he has learned to be both without apology. She writes back with a line that says, she heard, and she agrees, and she is moving at a speed that respects each step. The city outside is a map of tasks and small obediences. Buses cough and settle. A florist lifts buckets that have chosen a color for the day. A man with a carpenter pencil behind his ear pulls a tape and does not let it snap. Zoe joins the figure flow. She keeps her wrists high enough to make sense and low enough to blend. She does not hide the white. She does not perform it either. It is a fact that will fade at the rate the body chooses. On the way, she passes a newsstand. The papers are stacked with headlines that pretend to know where a story ends. A frame from the terminal sits on one front page, the shine of tile, the small flash of red. A girl held between officers and also walking herself. The photograph is not flattering and not cruel. It accepts light. She does not buy it. She lets it exist in public where it belongs. At a corner, she pauses under a tree that has decided to give shade to anyone without taking vows first. She thinks of the projector room and the steady light that refused to flatter. She thinks of the ledger and the pencil that underlined time without raising its voice. She thinks of the handwritten note in the margin that wanted to be a whisper and became a statement under a lens. She thinks of the rule with the blank reason field and how the blank spoke louder than a speech. None of it is an anthem. All of it is a record. She turns toward a library with wide steps and a door that does not try to intimidate. Inside, cool air lives in the spines, and between the tables, she carries a small stack to a seat near a window and copies passages by hand. Words on procedure that are older than the building. Words on evidence and custody and the dignity of writing a date correctly. Words on community oversight that do not use the phrase equal skies and still mean it. She copies because copying is a way the body learns, and because a hand that writes steady is a promise to the rest of her. At noon, her father waits at the corner agreed upon, holding 2 paper cups in the afternoon like a careful host. They walk without agenda. He asks how she slept. She tells him like a person, not a case. He says the forum recording is clean and will live in more than one place now. He names chairs and calendars and rooms where microphones will wake on time. He does not relish any of it. He respects it. They stop at a quiet stall for something as humble as soup and eat, leaning on a narrow counter that has made peace with rain and with sun and with the hourly business of people needing food and not spectacle. On the way back, he stops by a storefront and points at a display of comfortable shoes. He says he is buying her a pair because she is about to walk a season that will not reward fashion. She laughs and says she will accept the gift if he accepts her dinner later. He agrees on the spot. An honest trade. Inside, the clerk measures and listens and brings boxes that do not squeak. Zoe chooses a pair that fits like the day fits. Her father pays and does not turn it into a ceremony. Ownership sometimes means nothing more than you wore them and they behaved. They part at the station with a brief press of hands that does not pretend to fix the world. He tells her to call after her practice interview so he can hear the acoustics of the hallway. She says she will. He touches the wing at her collar once and leaves it exactly where it was. He walks away with the posture of a person who carries anger as a tool, not a hobby. Afternoon bends toward amber. At home, she resets the towel and refreshes the tea. She skims the binder of brochures and maps tucked into the envelope from the university. She circles a building where the questions will live and writes the route in small script along the margin, a private cartography. She stands in the hallway and asks herself 2 questions into the air and answers them out loud. The voice does not tremble. It is not hard. It is practice. Her phone chimes with a message from the recorder, a line that says the original file is safe and the device remains off, and the chain is intact. The words are short and correct. She replies with thanks that does not melt into sentiment. Another message arrives from the early shift woman. It contains nothing more than a sentence about a day off and a plan to sleep and a picture of a mug with a chipped rim. Zoe smiles with the part of her that keeps a ledger for human details that prove the world is still worth all this. She adds the image to memory, not for propaganda, simply for ballast. Evening draws close with the modesty of a clerk counting till she steps to the window and watches a plane lift above the river, like a thought that found a structure true enough to carry it. She thinks of pilots who know the difference between haste and speed. She thinks of the custodian and his coil of cable, and the way he spoke about catching small wrongs before they accrue interest. She thinks of the agent with the printed pass and the hands that did not shake when the room looked. She thinks of the contractor who wanted to do it correctly and sent the message twice to be sure. She sits and writes a short note to the medic, describing the wrists and the heat and the way the bandages held even in sleep. She thanks her for the lemon smell and for the way she spoke to Bled like an equal. She writes a short note to operations that says only that rails are multiplying and that she understands now why straight lines can feel like compassion in the mouth of a machine. She writes a short note to herself and tucks it into the back of the university envelope, a line that says, "Remember to breathe and to count and to bring clean paper." Night arrives honest. The room is a small country with kindly borders. She places the pin in its dish and touches the cool edge of the dish with her finger and has the small thought that objects are better when they do not demand stories to justify themselves. She washes her face with patience and dries it with the towel that lives near the sink, because that is where it belongs. She pours water and takes the last slow swallow like a truce. She turns out the lamp. The window keeps the simplest watch. Cars pass with their polite light. Somewhere, a radio gives up a song to the breeze, and the song remembers how to be quiet. She lies down with her wrists higher than her heart, and the breath count woven into the dark, like thread through cotton. In for a measured span, hold a grain, out until the ribs admit calm. She does not ask sleep to perform, she invites it the way you invite a friend who has earned a key. Tomorrow will bring halls and doors and questions and pens that want to behave. She will carry herself into the day the way she carried herself out of the terminal. She will keep the rails, not as armor, but as a way to welcome weight. She will accept help that looks like chain forms and open rooms and steady witnesses. She will mark time with a pencil when needed and with silence when better. The story has learned to be a life. The life has learned to be a story only when asked by courts or classrooms or people who need a map. She lets the two sit beside each other without quarrel. The city gives its last small exhale. The air settles. The day decides it has done enough and hands itself over. Justice signs in cold ink. Every once in a while, a story reminds us that dignity doesn't shout. It stands its ground quietly until truth has no choice but to listen. Zoe's journey isn't just about fighting an injustice at an airport. It's about something far more ordinary and therefore far more powerful. The courage to stay calm when the world misjudges you, and the faith to let fact, not fury, speak for you. In life, we all face moments when silence feels safer than confrontation, when the cost of truth feels too high. But as this story shows, peace built on fear isn't peace at all. It's paralysis. What Zoe learns is what so many of us must remember. Self-respect is not granted by others. It's reclaimed, one choice at a time. Procedure, fairness, and patience. Those aren't just bureaucratic words. In the right hands, they are instruments of justice. Gold does not fear fire, as the saying goes, and neither does integrity. It endures the heat, emerges sharper, and reflects light on everything around it. Maybe you've faced a situation where your voice was dismissed or your worth questioned. Maybe you chose silence to stay safe. But the road to real peace starts when you decide that your story deserves daylight. Justice doesn't always arrive with noise or applause. Sometimes, it's written in quiet ink, steady and cold, and that's enough. If Zoe's story moved you, share your thoughts below. Tell us how you've faced or witnessed moments of quiet courage. Hit like if this story reminded you of the strength in stillness, and subscribe for more stories that stir both heart and conscience. May your next dawn be calm, your spirit steady, and your truth unafraid to shine.